there's a great quote by a beautiful human being called Sid Banks, and Sid Banks is a Scottish spiritual teacher, philosopher. He was born in Leith, I believe in Duke Street, so my home city, and not too far from where I grew up. In fact, where I grew up in Leith. But he was a spiritual teacher and philosopher, and like I said, a beautiful human being who taught something called the Three Principles. And if you ever get the chance to check out the Three Principles or Sid Banks' work, he's wrote a lot of books, beautiful, some fables that are just beautiful to read as well. But he said every human being is sitting in the middle of mental health. They just don't know it. So every human being is sitting in the middle of mental health. They just don't know it. And that quote I first heard from Michael Neill, and when I heard that quote, it made so much sense in relation to my own experience of mental health. And I'm going to share a little bit about my journey today, about mental health and my experience of it. And then I'm going to, essentially invite us over the next 3 or 4 days to just explore what that means to us. So it's a slightly different take on bringing awareness to mental health this week. It's really bringing awareness to our own experience, and through that awareness, being able to see and understand and empathise and practice self-compassion, and potentially open up a new way of thinking around it that may lead us to an insight, or lead us to asking for help, or lead us to helping others. So I hope that makes sense. The reason that quote resonated so much is because for so many years I had anxiety, crippling anxiety, and I still experience it now at points. But for so many years I just operated in that space of anxiety, believing that was who I was. And quite often it was hidden, right? I wouldn't show that anxiety through a fear of being vulnerable. So I wouldn't talk to people about it because I never thought it was normal. I wouldn't show it to anyone because I worried what people would think. I worried that people would think I was weak. I was worried that it would prevent me from getting opportunities in my career, in the social circles that I was involved in. And all of that was a creation of my own experience, right? That I believed I couldn't ask for help. So I had anxiety for as long as I can remember, actually, probably around my mid-teens, early teens, actually, if I'm thinking back now as I'm talking. I had this experience of anxiety, and because it was so present in everyday life, I began to associate and identify with it. I thought that was just the way it is. And so I never had an awareness of the anxiety being something that could be processed, experienced, released, or even something that I could seek help for. And so I stayed imprisoned in my own mind for many, many years. For many years. And the Sid Banks quote where he says, every human being is sitting in the middle of mental health, they just don't know it, resonates so much because the anxiety for me was who I was. I just kind of, inherited that identity, that was part of my being, not realising that actually, through awareness, through knowing that anxiety, through shining a light of awareness on it, I could begin to release it, process it, let it go. Now, the interesting thing is we often talk about mental health and we often relate that to the individuals that are experiencing, extreme challenges with their mental health. Let's say depression, anxiety, chronic stress. And we forget that all of us, at some stage, at some point on that spectrum, if you like, are in a state of mental health. Like we have physical health. And on some periods of our life, it may be optimized, and in other periods of our life, it may not be. But the truth is that beyond the experience of our mental health is this whole complete human being. that is absolutely unbroken and not in the need of being fixed. And I think this is such an important part of the discussion when we talk about mental health, is that nobody is broken. Nobody needs fixed beyond and beneath that surface of thought. So for me, the anxiety was an experience of intense thought, worrying often about the past and the future, which I became identified with. And through that identification, it caused me internal suffering for so many years. But the narrative that we have to be really careful of is that I needed to be fixed, or that I was broken. And we use those terms, right? We use those terms. So suddenly if we have a belief that we need fixed, or that we're broken, suddenly we're starting from a very different place than if we believe that we are whole and complete, but that we may just need some help in processing these intense thoughts or experiences or emotions. When we begin to identify with the experience of anxiety, of depression, then it becomes more difficult to know it, to become aware of it, because we find ourselves entangled in it. We find ourselves immersed in it. And I have a lot of experience in this world, having close family members who suffer from depression and extreme depression at points, having been, like I said, experiencing tremendous amounts of anxiety from my younger years, and also experiencing many low points. I've never been clinically depressed, or certainly, diagnosed as clinically depressed, but I have experienced extreme lows, where without doubt I was in a state of depression. And so I've witnessed this in others. I've witnessed when the darkness can take over, when the individual or yourself feels engulfed by it and trapped, and we of course begin identifying with that as our being state, and then we fall into the belief that we need to be fixed, that we're broken. And if, like me, any of you who are watching has suffered from anxiety or depression, or maybe you are at the moment, one of the breakthrough beliefs for me was that actually beyond that experience is this whole, complete human being. And that wholeness never leaves us. That wholeness and that completeness is always present in our experience. And I wish I'd been told that in the times when I was struggling internally. Because when you begin to approach the experience of our mental health from that place, for me certainly it felt like a light at the end of the tunnel. It felt like there was hope, contained within that experience. And that actually through that hope and through that light, I realised that there is a way out of this. Right? So this was my experience. Now, the journey that I've been on over the past 6 years, which has been a healing journey, has at points been challenging, of course, has been slow. For someone that likes things to happen quickly, I've had to be patient. I've had to practice self-compassion and kindness, which was not present prior to going on this journey. Again, I wasn't aware of that though. I never knew that, because I was entangled in my thought and entangled in my experience. Now, what are the lessons that I've learned through my journey? Well, it took, a few intense experiences to wake me up from my sleep, if you like, to wake me up from this belief that was who I was, that I was anxiety, that I was these states of being that I'd just become accustomed to over time. And I've shared with you how one of those was through a shamanic healing ceremony, others were through healing experiences with healers and intuitive, healers and coaches and mentors, and going to workshops and going to various different events where I began self-inquiring, where I began to open up and realised that it was okay to be vulnerable. Not easy, but it was okay. And the experience in the shamanic healing ceremony was one of, the calls to action that I was given in that very intense, deep, powerful, transformative, profound, awakening, was the words kept on repeating: ask for help, ask for help, ask for help. And it kept on saying, you're making life more difficult than it needs to be. Ask for help. And I think that over the last few years, we've begun to talk more openly about mental health, and having weeks like this where we bring awareness to it hopefully creates a container and a space for people to ask for help, to open up, to find someone in their life that they can speak to and share what is on their mind. Through that sharing, it's often enough to begin bringing awareness to it. Through that vulnerability, it's often enough to start the healing process. And I truly wish that this experience of being able to ask for help is something that we taught in schools. It wasn't something that came naturally to me at all. It was probably one of the most difficult things that I've ever did, was to ask for help. But upon doing it, it was completely life transforming. Because for the first time, my belief that if I asked for help I would be seen as weak was beginning to be challenged. It was a paradigm shift. It was a paradigm shift that actually I can speak up. I can ask for help. I can be vulnerable. I don't have to put on this strong facade and this strong exterior, representation of who I am, where I believe that strong was related to not showing emotions. Strong was related to not showing vulnerability. Strong was not being able to say I'm not okay.